So in this episode, we're definitely doing something a little bit special because I've got my really great friend here, Charo, who's looking to build a podcast studio. Just create content online and, well, use the power of Cinamaker and multicam video to make a more engaging show. I guess maybe he was inspired by this show. Anyway, we're going to dive into some of his questions. This is episode 10 of the Director Studio Show. My name is Marc Angelo, and I'm a digital storyteller, entrepreneur, and creative who has made thousands of pieces of content online viewed by millions all over the world. But the one thing I have always been passionate about is helping people like you create great video content. That's why I partnered up with Cinamaker to create the Director Studio Show, a video podcast that brings you behind the scenes on the how-tos of creating a multi-camera show for entrepreneurs, creators, podcasters, and marketing experts who dream of creating simple, effective, and scalable video content. So let's dive in. So Charo and I have been friends for a long time, and we've also created together. We started something called Mail Montreal and have been working together on so many levels, including him kicking my ass in the gym, although, not gonna lie, I haven't been in a long time. But one of the things that, Charo and I have also really bonded on is making content. And of course, Charo's seen some of the episodes, some of the work that I do online, not only for this show, but for my own online podcast called the Valhalla Movement Podcast, which I've actually never really announced on this show. So maybe you should check that out too. And we decided that he wanted to, put together a studio. He wanted to ask me a bunch of questions, and I was like, hey, why don't we just do this literally as the show? So here we are. Welcome to the show, Charo.
Thanks for having me. I don't know if we all understand how hard it is to create content.
We don't know how hard it is to create content. Sure. So do you want me to just speak to how hard that might be?
Or first I'll explain how I feel. My way is cell phone at my house, trying to record, trying to edit, and fixing it all through my camera. And I don't have enough tools and tricks to get the right quality, right pace, and feel comfortable to produce enough, I guess.
Okay, so let's break that down piece by piece. Let's start with first the quality of what, like when you're saying quality, you're talking about image quality.
Image quality too, but I'm also I'm looking at your setup over there. Sound quality is something that I'm working on, so I'm trying to figure out how that works.
This right over here. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of context. I'm going to switch to this camera angle right over here. What you're seeing here is, Charo and I are in the same space. Obviously, we're in my studio here. And for those of you who watched this show before, you know that this computer right over here is actually recording right now. It's called our production computer. It's what I'm looking at. It's how it's functioning. And this is what I'm kind of operating with this keyboard that's in front of me. Now, in front of me here is what we'll call our demo computer. And Charo's got the mouse and keyboard to operate that and move that around. So, this is the studio, and what Charo is pointing to is this Focusrite and or kind of this here, the soundboard that I use, which is called the Rodecaster Pro. This is the first generation Rodecaster Pro. This is a Focusrite Scarlett 2i2. Very cool, very interesting. I mean, there are two different setups. The only reason I run two different setups is because I want to show the difference between maybe something that's simpler, right? A very simple setup with one headphone out, kind of a double port. They do sell them in other models. In fact, I have one right over here that's an 8-port. This is a different one. This is a Scarlett, I think it's 18i20. But I don't really use this, or I originally used this. And I do love this Rodecaster Pro. I do love the way that this functions and how this works. As well as the fact that I have a strong, beautiful microphone. These are the Shure, I think they're called SM7Bs, right? So this microphone right over here that we're both using, the way this is currently structured, a little convoluted, is we have the mics, which are XLR cables. They're connected to the back of this Rodecaster, and then I'm just porting from the Rodecaster into this Focusrite. Again, just for the sake of testing certain things, I'm also testing different frequencies at 44.1 hertz versus 48 hertz. Cinamaker will support both. It natively prefers 44.1 at the moment, but it will actually promote both. So I think this Focusrite here that I kind of have right next to me is kind of the simplest way, because what you do is you see these lights that are kind of, gleaming, and I'm not sure if you'll see it on this angle. No, you don't. Okay, so you see these kind of lights just flashing up next to us. What's really interesting about that is you're seeing whether it's peaking. Like if I were to yell really loud, you'll see that it gets a little red or orange. If it's at yellow, it's kind of going to the kind of pretty much the right level. You don't want to always be yellow, but if you hit yellow from time to time, you're at a decent level. And obviously, if you're seeing green, that's okay. That's showing you're in the right range. And yeah, I mean, any show, any podcast, any video that you're creating, even for TikTok or Reels or YouTube or whatever, audio quality is always going to be an important component, particularly if it's long format. Meaning, if somebody's going to listen to you for a long time, the audio quality's got to be good. If the audio quality is, or if the videos of you walking out on the streets, you know, you can get away with a different form of audio quality, but I think if you're building a studio, I think it makes sense to consider sound. And you were saying this right before we hit record, but it also makes sense to consider the space around you. Now, what a lot of people don't see, maybe you see it a little bit more here, is that this place has a lot of brick, wood, rock, and stuff, but right above us, there's these kind of like giant wood beams, and then I put these kind of little foam pads up to remove any reverberation or echo. But this place doesn't really have that much, and I don't think your place does either. I think your place is pretty like good with when it comes to echo.
I think for that, the setup will be good. I also like how you set things up so they're permanent.
Yes, so I kind of have, you know, here on the background here, you've got this kind of what I'll call, you know, ring light that you kind of see in the frame over here. And that's only from time to time that I do like turn that on. I'll turn that on if I'm recording in this direction, and maybe I want to kind of get rid of a little bit of like how tired I am. So
every day,
you know what I mean? Like, yeah, exactly. So I find I find it good to fill a little bit of my face, particularly in the kind of solo cast format. But yeah, I mean, I have these lights, LED lights that can tweak the color so they can go from white to orange, right? And so there's lights are talked about in Kelvin. And so you can match the Kelvin, the rating, either up or down to more blue or more orange.
Gotcha.
Right? And then I just shine them in both of these cases at 100% or maybe 80, 85, depending. Sometimes daytime, I will turn them down a little bit. Sometimes, you know, nighttime, like tonight, I will turn them up. But yes, I love the idea of the permanence of the studio, right? This desk doesn't move. These mics, these stands don't move. The Rodecaster doesn't move, nor does the Focusrite. The demo computer never moves. It only moves from time to time when I'm working here, and I just kind of move it out of the way, and I work with my my production computer, which is my main computer, right? But for the most part, I am really not changing the space a ton. You know, what sounds silly is even as a character, I wear the same setup.
I've noticed that.
Yeah. So that's a thing where I think people can recognize you based on a look, right? Like there's many podcasters out there that have a particular look and feel to who even they are as a character. And I think that gives repeatability, remindability, or, oh yeah, that guy. You know what I mean? Like even if you don't know familiarity, but even if they don't know your name, they kind of know your format. You know what I mean? So, yeah. So when it comes to quality, definitely a mic like this is valuable. I do have something on kit.co where I have all the different mics that I might recommend at kind of different tiers, and I have tried the Rode, I think it's an NTS or NT1 or NTS1 or something like that. But I really love the Shure SM7Bs. These are the Rogan, inspired microphones. Very sharp, very cool. You don't want to talk too far from them. You don't want to talk too close to them. But I kind of like just something that travels. So, the arm really becomes an interesting thing when considering quality, and just, sometimes I engage, like even in the intro, I moved in and I lean forward, and it kind of gives you a feeling for them to lean in, right? So as somebody who's listening to your show. So, yeah, that's one thing. Then camera quality. So we've got a DSLR setup. What you're looking at is a Canon 6D. Well, what's it shooting on is a Lumix GH5, and I've got a Lumix GH4, which is this angle. This is what I'll call side camera angle. But they're all DSLRs. They're all functions of, a mirrorless, or, well, these are all mirrored cameras, or no, mirrorless, I think, on the Lumixes. But, mirrored camera, but a good lens, gives a fairly sharp image, no doubt.
What's a good lens?
Well, a good lens, I mean, that's a kind of an arguable content. I think the lens that I have here and that you're seeing the quality of this is what is called a 2470. Okay, it's a 2.8 aperture, but I shoot this at 4.5 just so that I have a little bit of depth, meaning when I go backwards and forward, I'm still like fairly focused. If I go really further back, you see that the focus kind of loses itself. But a 24-70 is like probably the best all-round high-quality lens. Now, that being said, I think the new iPhones and like new, digital cameras as well, mirrorless cameras, Sony's, a bunch of different other options are also completely reasonable. I just so happen to have these. You know what I mean? I just so happen to have this kind of equipment. I just so happen to have a nice power bar even, which, I feel gives very good consistent power. So there's no like static maybe in the audio quality or in any of the equipment or anything that I'm using. And then I also have what you don't see is right underneath the desk under here, there's a whole Wi-Fi router system. So it's a dedicated Wi-Fi in my personal case. Not that I really needed it. My other Wi-Fi is like kind of just around the corner, right? Down over that way in that corner over there. But I do have it. It gives me the option to hardwire all the cameras in. And they also use all plug-in batteries. So the back to permanency, you don't want to be like constantly chasing batteries. You don't want to be constantly charging and uncharging and plugging and unplugging and doing those different things. So the more that you can build your format and the more that you can think about what your backdrop is and your set looks like and how that all feels, the more that you can build that permanency. And then within that, you can make like a little switch up. Like if everyone who knows me knows I put this kind of fire behind me often on many of the recordings that I do.
Yeah.
What's hilarious is I could change that fire. Or I could put something else there at some point, and then people will notice, the people who watch the show. So you can put a book behind you that would change all the time. Or here I have kind of this, subscribe button, but I can easily put something else here on a regular basis that, fans of the show would maybe pay attention to, in some way, shape, or form. So, but yeah. So, and then you were saying something about pacing, and you were saying something about something else being hard. I can't remember what you said, actually.
Well, you touched on something that's kind of important for me because right now I have things at home. So being able to know, like, okay, I can still take in a DSLR and use my camera so I can start.
Yes, sure.
And that's it's the starting point that's always going to be the hard point. So knowing that I can put in one camera in place, maybe another cell phone, then I'll have two.
Yep.
And I can see how it works. So when you're from that camera, after that, you can edit to the vertical and horizontal. So no matter what, that'll be later on. But
yeah, so you're obviously in this kind of production computer, and if you were doing something like this, and I'll have you start a new session here. So if you want to grab that, just start a new session. So you obviously are recording, and this is bad camera. This is just the setup over here. But if you were to go to this bottom right corner here, right? So they click on that. You can change or turn on some of the same cameras. So you see main camera is the second one. Click that one there. And then click host side camera, the one on the top. Yeah.
I watched the show. I know which one.
Yeah. So then go to the, great. So go click back at the top there. Okay, so now you have access and now you have control over these different camera angles. And it's weird because you're seeing kind of it's a very like meta scenario right now. But if you were to do Command 2.
Which one's Command now?
Command is this one right here.
Gotcha.
Do it again. Hold Command and 2 at the same time. Oh, no. Hold on.
Power's on. Gotcha.
It's your connect. There you go. So now this creates kind of a bit of a meta situation because what we're doing is we're doing a double instance of Cinamaker. We're recording kind of on this computer over here, again, production computer, recording here, demo computer. We're just mirroring the same thing for the sake of show and tell, so to speak. So, setup wise, yes, you can have a DSLR as maybe your main, and then you would have kind of, camera 2 as maybe an iPhone or something of that nature. And then what you're really doing is you're taking the audio out of whatever your soundboard is, whatever sound system you have, right? Okay, again, Rodecaster or Focusrite, Scarlett 2i2. Whatever's coming out of that, I'm just plugging it directly into my computer. And that's normally a USB connection. And then I have what is called the audio tab. So go to the audio tab up there. So it's that third. Yep, there you go. And then if you were to go down and click on current device.
Yep.
Yeah. So if click on that, it's at 0 because right now we're not recording on this demo computer. all the audio is going into this production computer. But what's, actually I'll show that. So he went to the audio tab at the top and then to the current device there. So he now, if this, sound system was plugged into this computer, you would see those audio levels move on that current device piece right over there. So it gives you a capacity and you could slide it up. I normally slide it up to about 80. I don't like put it all the way at the top because one pro tip is to always have your audio bit a little lower than a little too high. Like the worst thing you have that would ruin your audio is like audio clipping, which is like when it's hitting that red
Peaking
piece, right? Yeah, it's peaking and it's just like, and then it will clip and it'll feel weird from a listener's perspective. So, this gives you a kind of an understanding of how that works, and how this connects and the setup you may have. Now, I will say that when you're doing a DSLR and an iPhone setup, the iPhone or the iPad, if you chose to edit this on an iPad instead of a computer. Now, obviously, on the iPad, you'd be clicking on the different or like touch screening on the different cameras rather than commanding, let's say. The difference is that the iPhones and the iPads can connect wirelessly as long as they're on the same wireless network. Whereas the DSLRs, even though if they might have Wi-Fi connection, and that maybe could work, but I don't think so. You don't want to rely on that. What I have is these boxes that are called encoders, HDMI encoders.
Yep.
So I've got a plug-in charger for the camera over here, right? So I'm going to go to this screen over here. I've got a plug-in charger going into the wall, keeping this camera on. I've got an HDMI, no matter what HDMI that you would have in any DSLR, or including a screen share. In my case, I'm doing the screen share into from an HDMI into one of those boxes. But I have HDMI into HDMI encoder. So it's an HDMI, a power source, and Ethernet cable. Ethernet cables are those internet cables that you would have.
Plug directly in. And
then I just plug that directly into the back of the Wi-Fi router. And so now this brings online this camera. I name it in Cinamaker. And now I know which camera it is, and I can turn them on in a particular order because sometimes I like to flick these in a particular order. It allows me to remember camera 1 is always here, camera 2 is always there. Camera 3 for me is often screen share, or in certain cases when, behind the scenes makes a lot of sense, it's here. And then I have control over, some of these different layers or media layers so that, people could see me, but they can also see something that would be showing. But I don't have to be using those. So I've got a dialed-in setup, right? You could clearly see that I know, and I've just kind of gotten so used to switching and doing the things. Of course, you can have somebody switch for you, of course.
Yeah, well, that's it. I've seen you do it all the time. It's nice to be in the scene,
to see the scene, yeah.
And I'm really not a tech guy.
Sure.
So the fact that I'm just touching it for a second, I'm like, oh, this is a lot easier than I think. So it's taking that fear step away, and I'm like, this is a lot smoother than my brain was thinking about before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it can come off as a little steep in terms of learning curve, or maybe a little more complicated, and there's a lot of buttons that you don't know and you haven't played with before. But the way I see it is like the best thing you can do is hit record, right? The best thing you can do is just go and find that record button at the bottom and then like take the time to essentially try it and play with it and connect the cameras and do all the different things. And then go through the process. My thought is the first thing you want to do is get the cameras online, and then you want to make sure the audio is coming through, right? And you can listen to the audio coming through. So if you go to the top right over there, or just like above the output monitor, so that thing right over there, exactly. So if you click on that, it says audio monitoring. If you were to turn that on, you would then be able to naturally hear the audio that's coming through on the different layers here. So you could turn that off because we're not actually listening to that.
Now, what's the advantage of having different camera angles?
So there's 2 layers of advantage for having different camera angles. The first is just an attention layer. It's just a way of communicating and having more camera cuts that I think keep retention because it's more interesting, and it also comes off as more pro. Right? Like it just like you put more time and energy into it. But more importantly, I think it just kind of, it's so much easier and it's so much more like next level. But it also, again, is significantly more engaging just because of the different looks and feels and the cuts between these different angles really makes a different dynamic. Now, the second tier to that is it becomes a character in your story. So when I do an intro, you always kind of have me here, but then when I want to like do like a director's cut, like when I'm going to give like maybe a behind the scenes style like pro tip, or I want to emphasize something, I would then use this angle, and I can also change this angle to be a little tighter, a little closer. I feel a little more cropped. I can keep, normally I have to keep a little bit more open space in front of me, but we're obviously framing for both of us. But when I want to make a point, I will look to this camera. When I want to repeat myself, or if I really want to nail something home, or I want to change my pacing, right? So imagine you're telling a story, and now all of a sudden it's the moral of the story. Bang. You just went from telling the basics of the story, this is how it happened, here's the context, all the different pieces, here's what you need to remember. So I would consider that the different angles are representative of a different feeling. If you watch like what do you want to call it, one of these daytime TV shows or a telenovela or whatever, right? Like just like a Young and the Restless or The Days of Our Lives or one of those things. It sounds silly, but the cut-ins of the cameras that go and show people's faces and the emotion and the different feelings that these different camera angles offer to us has an impact, in my personal opinion, on the experience from the end user's perspective, from the viewer who at the end of the day is taking their time to pay attention. So having these different elements allows me to kind of create better context. For me, obviously having a BTS camera or a screen share, enables me to, go onto the internet, for example, and I come on here and I can say, oh, let's see what the Cinamaker website looks like. And I can surf the web and do all kinds of different things. It's significantly more engaging in multitude of different ways that just help me tell better stories.
And just at the speed you did that fascinated me. I was like, oh, cool. Because my brain doesn't know these tricks yet. So seeing how easy it is to access, I was like, oh, that'll make my life a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, using the mouse here, all I did was kind of navigate away from Cinamaker. So, if I go here, I go away from Cinamaker, and into just the website and a browser. And so if I wanted to go to, it's on your keyboard, but if you were to type in YouTube, right, and let's say we wanted to bring up something because we were having a debate and we were talking about something, it
would be up.
Boom, there you go. And now you can navigate and click and do whatever you wanted to do. So for me, navigating and again, pressing record and just trying and testing and doing those things is valuable. It's harder, I would say, sometimes in your own mind in one big rant to realize when you should cut from here to there, or like this type of character to this type of character, right? So this is, to me, I'll call him Marc Angelo. This is like me, who I am as a character online, but this is kind of like me, the behind the scenes director, the marketer, the giving you the tips. And sometimes when I get meta, I'd like to go to this camera. On this show, there's a lot of kind of getting meta because I'm talking about making a show while making the show. So it's a way of using the tool to the fullest of extent and just making a better show.
I like it. Yeah. And I've seen you use it, and it's also something that caught my attention. So when it's there, it's like I can see you talking in one way, and then you're like, let me tell you about this, and it catches me, keeps me longer. Yes,
exactly. So, exactly, I'm bringing you in the fold in multiple different ways, which is a part of how that works. It's great that you brought up YouTube. There's 2 videos of mine, which is hilarious. There's one video of mine right over here that I was from our Valhalla Movement channel, and then I guess there's one of the clips from this very show. So that's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, any other questions? Or I mean, I'm sure you've got.
So for me, who's starting, don't have a MacBook. I'm going to start with an iPad.
Yeah, sure.
I know it's a funny, simple question, but do I have to worry about the storage space on the iPad, or is that something on the back end of Cinamaker?
The storage, the way it works is it can store to local device, and so therefore it's the storage on the iPad, not the storage or whatever the MacBook, not the storage of the camera in any way, shape, or form. So we're actually not recording anything to the cards on these cameras. You don't have to pull out cards, download them onto hard drives, or do any of those things. It's all going on into Cinamaker directly, and then whatever device you're recording on, that's what it's being stored on. Now, there is what is called the iCloud kind of option, or the cloud option. What that means is it's storing onto your iCloud account. So if you have an iCloud account, if you're a Mac user or you have, iPhone, many people do. So it would go into that account. But I would say, I personally believe that it's just better to do it to the device and have a bit more storage on the device itself.
And that's why I'm happy we did this, because I'm just about to buy the stuff, and those are small questions. It's like, okay, it'll change.
Yeah. Where do I have to get the storage, or what do I need? Now, I will say some DSLRs you do have to have a camera in, or else it will show kind of a little no card in or whatever. And the way that this DSLR works is I just remove all the info screens. So normally, if I were to go and press info, you would see the aperture, you'd see certain things pop up on the screen. But in this particular case, because it's an HDMI out, it's almost like a screen mirroring. It's almost like you connecting a laptop to a TV. Yeah. Same thing. It's just screen mirroring one to the next. It's just doing that through the Ethernet and then kind of running into becoming one of these angles here.
Cool.
Yeah.
And then same thing. So if I'm using my iPhone, it won't touch the storage on my iPhone. Everything belongs onto the device.
Yeah. So if you're putting an iPhone as a camera, it's just it's recording everything to the device you hit record on. Gotcha. So in this case, an iPad or a MacBook. And eventually there will be, and this is kind of a Cinamaker, exclusive, there is a cloud-based version of Cinamaker that is coming out. It will start as a beta for all the Zoom stuff, like remote guest stuff, because we could also bring in a remote guest. You could bring in a Zoom guest to come in and be one of the separate camera angles, and then you can kind of have a direct conversation with them while still switching between the different camera angles in your setup.
Gotcha. And you're controlling their camera angle technically.
You can go to their camera angle when they talk, exactly. Yeah. Now, in the cloud version, that will automatically happen as well based on who's speaking, based on audio. Huh. So that's kind of cool. So, but again, that will function first only on Zoom for a little bit, but then all the different layers of that will come online soon. But I think, again, I like it saves to my direct device.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's also like, if it was saving on my phone, you'd probably be taking up so much storage all the time and trying to figure it out.
No, the phone, you definitely don't want to do the kind of phone route in terms of recording. Well, it doesn't even record on the phones, but a good iPad or even a MacBook, any MacBook like M1 chip or older, which means it's kind of like any MacBook that's like 2020 or older should do just great. MacBook Pros are obviously things that are upgraded in RAM or video cards or anything else is helpful. But any Mac kind of with the newer generation type chips, newer generation processing power are pretty great.
So if we were to talk about a good basic starter kit.
Yeah, I mean, so everyone has a different idea of what starting means, right? Like, I think that for me, a starting kit requires really good mics and stands. For me, a starting kit still requires this, this Rodecaster Pro in the background, because I like the idea of having these little, sound effects and different things that we can bring in and play with. I like the backup audio recording. I kind of like that I can put and plug in all the headphones and I can have 4 guests all on the same time. So, I enjoy those different components. Where you can, I want to say cheap out, but you can be cheaper is not getting the MacBook Pro. Again, getting the iPad, that can be cheaper. Although you could get like a MacBook Air, newer generation with M2 chip or something like that. That could be still like similar price to an iPad, maybe a little more expensive. But more flexible, could do other things with it too. With maybe more of a work computer, good for travel, stuff like that. iPad too, though. And then it's a question of cameras, but where you can go with cameras and lights. Lights are fairly cheap. Soundboard, little like foam pads, things like that. Fairly cheap, easy to install. I wouldn't cheap out necessarily on the lights. I would get some like pretty good LED video lights. Look for video lights, not photography lights, which means constant power. They don't flash, and they also kind of generally don't have. They don't cause like a weird light effect essentially on camera. But I could see where you would go with maybe one DSLR and one iPhone or 2 iPhones or something like that, right? And if you were doing interviews, I could see the value of one camera kind of looking at the host, one camera, let's say this camera would have normally been looking at the guest, but positioned slightly differently. And then, and then there's, let's say, a camera looking at both of us. Well, I would move that around. If we're facing each other, you have kind of, all the cameras out on one side, one towards one towards the other, kind of crossing each other, and then the other hitting both those people. That's a cool kind of setup. Normally what I do in podcast mode, let's say.
Sweet. Yeah, I've seen that before too. You usually have the camera in the middle, so you catch both.
Yeah. So I had you as a guest on my podcast, I want to say a year or two ago, probably 2 years ago now. That would have been the setup.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions at this point in time? I'm looking at the editing, and I know that'll be the next step.
The editing, I mean, it boils down to like how much editing you want to do. Okay. Like I really try and function, and I really try and make the show fit my format. And what my format is I just go. I don't like edit a bunch out. What I'll edit later is in the clips or in the reels or in some of those different components, because I think that just like makes it easier for me. It just makes it easier for me to not have to go in and like doctor the main file a ton. I don't like necessarily using any editor. So it's not that I have anything against the Cinamaker editor. It's just I don't like to edit. I would rather just kind of have a free form and then edit and get selective pieces later.
From it.
Yeah. So I just hit record and then I go. Now, technically, I also have a producer for my show or for this show that helps do the clips and does all these different things. So it doesn't require me personally, a ton of time. And that's a balance between how much you want to do yourself and how much do you want to hand off. That being said, though, I would challenge you to learn how to edit a little bit just so you can speak editor. So that even if you were to hire someone, you can kind of like give them a little bit more direction. You know what I mean? And at least speaking editor to the level of like watching it yourself, putting time codes, saying, hey, I would really love a clip from this to this, or, in this section, I kind of like it, but I don't know where I would cut it. What would you do? And then giving it to them and trusting them a little bit. Or if you find a very specific moment, just going to that and saying, here, it starts here, it ends there. I need this in vertical format, or I need this for a YouTube clip, so on and so forth. So the more that you can kind of like support the editor, remembering that maybe they didn't listen to the podcast or they're not as nuanced about what you're creating as you are, it is valuable. Now, the editor is basically as easy as what we were doing earlier, which is switching cameras. You kind of press play and you can re-roll. It's almost like you're watching the podcast that I'm doing now, but let's say I made this edit cut now instead, and I can do this with my mouse. You can rewatch it and then say, no, I want to switch to this camera instead again.
Yeah.
And so you're just kind of washing it over and re-editing, re-rolling the edits through. And now there's an instant edit mode as well, where you can go to a timeline, hit instant edit, and it'll change that whole camera angle to that angle.
And I also
or a whole section to that angle.
I like the fact that you say learn, because I don't like feeling useless.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great point. Yeah. None of us do.
The more I get to learn, again, it's going to just teach me. So if I ever get stuck, I can do that myself a little bit, not always depend on somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
I find that a very important tool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What else is there on this thing? I mean, there's tons of stuff.
Well, sure. So we can talk about the tools, but we can also talk about content, or just talk about strategy. So if you have questions about that, I can also answer that.
Which platform? I guess that's the answer itself. Like, it's which platform I decide to use the most. Like, I will be on Instagram a lot and YouTube a lot.
Yes.
Those are the
more
two.
Male audiences.
More male audiences. Yeah. Also, like you're saying, it seems important to create a long format and then find selective videos to put onto other things.
Yeah, I mean, I like that just because, again, I have to sit down once and I have to just I can put out all my thoughts and I can let other elements or other even people in certain cases decide what was interesting about that. Not only to me, but now from their perspective and what that looks like to them. And so I find a good amount of value in just letting myself flow, having a little bit more space, being able to kind of answer different questions or kind of go in different directions. And I also value somebody who's going to listen to a full episode or a full show much more than I would value the attention on Instagram. So sure, Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts or TikTok might get way more views, but the value of that view, how much people know about you, whether they know your name, whether they really know what you're passionate about, whether they know what you're selling or what you're offering, right? All of those decrease significantly in quality in these shorter format platforms. Because again, the buy-in and the amount of retention, the amount of time that they spend listening to you is much shorter. Now, those shorter format elements are a good way of being discovered, right? You have a new show. Nobody's ever heard of you. Nobody's ever heard of your show. Well, how are they going to know? Well, yeah, you could share it on Instagram. You can make stories. You can do whatever, but you can also make reels. You can also make content that drives people to the larger episode. So that balance between those two and mining the big format to make the smaller formats is definitely my number one strategy. You probably listened to the episode about that, about the kind of the content pyramid. What I like about that is, again, it's stacking functions. Right? You record, you know exactly where the pieces are, you do the time codes, you do all the stuff, you upload wherever you need to do, and then you start editing either the pieces yourself or you hand this off to somebody else. You know, and I was mentioning this in the last episode that has not yet aired, but by the time somebody's watching this, it has. I love, editing or, hiring people from the Philippines, for example. Very good at English, very talented pool of, all types of creative work. And also assistant work. So they're the kind of people who they might have a team where they have an editor, but they also have a social media scheduler, somebody who would just go and help you publish the content on a calendar with a very clear cadence. And so then your only job is I have to deliver them something by, let's say a Monday if I want it edited by a Thursday and published on a Friday or something like that. You know what I mean? You just have that pattern, and then you just have to focus on making the show better, knowing your angles, knowing your cuts and your format and all the different components to it, and getting more and more comfortable with the use of the equipment that you're using, the cameras, the tools themselves.
Nice.
Yeah.
There was a question there. Oh, so I've been asked to go do a couple of Instagram lives. Can you record at the same time? Or is that?
Yeah. So in this, and what we'll do is we'll go to the screen share here. So just use this camera. We kind of pause the cameras down over there. But if you were to go and hit the record button.
Yep.
So what you now have on screen here on the left-hand side is you have what is called record and live edit. So I can record and live edit, but I can also stream to different places. Now, Instagram Live, it doesn't natively do this in terms of how Instagram Live works. There's a possibility that now Instagram has a RTMP, what is called an RTMP server. So there's these tools that are coming out. Actually, one of them is coming out very, very, very soon. If not by the time of this episode, we'll see. But there's one called Blaster, and that's by Cinamaker, where you can pull together the different streams by, you can basically multi-stream it to multiple different places. And so you can connect a Facebook Live account or LinkedIn Live account, some of these other places, YouTube Live, Zoom, and kind of stream it to all of them at the exact same time. Instagram tends to have a little bit of a block on RTMPs, or at least it traditionally has. That might have changed recently, though. So I haven't tried it because I'm not particularly huge on the live format, me personally.
Gotcha.
Because I'll just stream that and do other things. And I find live as good as what I'll call hub content. Hub meaning community content. It's your network of people who follow you. And so what I like to do live is something that's engaging live, where I'm truly answering their questions, or I'm having a conversation, or I'm talking about a frustration that just came up for me, or a moment that I'm living passionately in my life, and in my mind at that moment. That's when I like to go live. Everything else I like to record, edit, change, whatever. I don't really edit out a ton, right? After I hit record and I kind of get some of these things, like I said, I don't edit out a ton. But again, you can record to your device and you can live stream as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just that toggle up at the top left over there that says record and edit. And then you can title it and, and then there's also the different record modes, right? You just want to record, you just want to live edit. So you just want to record without being able to having to switch cameras. You hit record and you can edit it all in the Cinamaker editor later. If you want to just live edit, you can also do that. I always do record and live edit. I think it's the best is to do both. There's no reason you wouldn't.
That's it. Because I've done a couple of lives, and sometimes you get those really great moments, and then you lose them because you can't go find them again.
Yeah, sure. Tougher. Yeah. So it's better. It is significantly better to record for sure. And understanding that you can go back and re-edit or readjust is valuable.
Yeah, because I think from what I understand from what I posted on Instagram, you have the whole story, but you can't go get those little clips anymore. just having it backed
No.
up onto something and then being able to get.
Then you have to edit it separately and the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas this goes right into an editor the second you're finished. You could go right in and edit it right after, seamlessly, totally seamlessly. So I think that has a very strong value.
Okay. I mean, I've already spoken to you so many times. It's already in my head because I
Sure.
already know it. So it's there. And it's just basically, it's like,
We can refresh on anything, though.
yeah, it's basically just do it, get used to it. I think it's consistency. You've always said that.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is like the best thing you could do is be incredibly consistent to the format of what you're going to do as a pattern. Meaning, what is your life going to look like? Like when you go to the gym, right? You go to the gym at 7 a.m., 7:30, whatever it is, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, boom, that's the time you go. That's how you exercise that muscle. I think the same thing becomes true for you making content online and you sharing your story and you sharing what you're passionate about, whatever the type of content you want to create. And then the pattern being the same as, okay, I record the long show, I do 2 YouTube clips, and I do 3 Reels, TikToks, and YouTube Shorts kind of vertical format. I make these thumbnails, I post them at these times on these days. The more that you don't have to, second guess yourself or have to kind of think about these things over and over and over again or reinvent the wheel, the simpler the lifestyle, the simpler you bake it into your calendar, the simpler all the other people who work with you, if you have people working with you, bake it in. And also like even scheduling, right? Thinking about like, hey, when am I going to invite a guest? Well, it's like, oh, when can you? It's like, well, Tuesdays at 7. Does that work? So on my calendar, I always have from 6 to 9 Tuesdays is like a time where I'm going to be playing with Cinamaker, possibly recording. And boom, here we are, Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. You're here,
That's it.
So it's just like in that flow. So then when you had the questions, it's in my calendar. Great. Let me book right into that. And sometimes I'm doing it. Sometimes I'm not, right? Sometimes I book it into different pieces of my calendar where I might want to record in the mornings in certain cases and might want to record at nights in others. Again, based on context, based on vibe, right? Like sometimes, if I'm running a podcast, it's more of a morning show vibe. Something like, hey, take coffee with Marc Angelo. It's like, what's on the news today? You open up the day and you kind of pay attention to what's going on in the world in the first thing in the morning. That has a different feeling than a show, of different nature.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. And putting it in your calendar is super important. If I don't put anything in my calendar, sometimes I'll just walk right over and completely forget about it.
Yeah, vital. Once you can establish that pattern and keep that pattern going, I think it's unbelievably powerful to do so.
Okay. Thumbnails, I already looked at.
Yeah.
I like the way you always say how important a story is.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the number one important component is, first of all, title and thumbnail. And if you can have that ahead of recording, specifically if you're making content with like a very specific purpose, it's so valuable to know what that title and thumbnail might be. You might change it after you record. But I think if you're going into it with maybe a couple of titles or one title that you really like and one thumbnail you really like, and then after recording, you just kind of validate that's still what you think the topic was or what the interesting piece was, or that you still feel good about it. And you all the way until you hit upload, you can, make that change or shift or lane shift. But knowing that ahead of time, and then yes, understanding the story and where you are in the story. Right. So like when we started this podcast, I do a little intro, boom, that gives, a little bit of interest. Oh, this show's a little bit different. Like we've got something different going on. That draws in a different audience, somebody, and the thumbnail can communicate, hey, I've got a guest on this episode. But the title can say, answering potential Cinemakers, all of the your questions about Cinamaker with somebody who's looking to establish themselves in a studio. Like that title might be slightly different or more searchable than the thumbnail can then communicate other elements.
And in there is something that's important. How do you know what is trending and searchable?
AI can tell you that a lot. There's some like cool tools out there, vidIQ or TubeBuddy, that you can install. And every time you go on YouTube, you can see when you type in certain search words, what is trending, what is that's looking like. I think the other thing is just paying attention. Like where you publish, you should pay attention. You should be like part of the community or a consumer of sorts. And a consumer with a consciousness, meaning you're consuming with the intent of understanding what other people may or may not be talking about. But back to the story component, I think it's more valuable that you stick to whatever format your story and your flow is. So, one of the things I do a lot of is, hello, ladies and gentlemen, in my own show, my own content. Here on this show, I always do, let's dive in. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
So most of the episodes start with the let's dive in, and then we kind of go into that. So the story kind of starts somewhere with an interesting hook. Then I create context. Then I kind of, share who you are, why we're here, why we're talking. And then we go down whatever rabbit hole the show is designed to go down. And that could, some people like to script a lot. Some people really love bullet points. I love using something called Milanote, where we just kind of script the hook. We script the different, I tend to break it down to 3 sections, beginning, middle, and end kind of, or, where am I starting? How can I expand on that a little bit? And how can I kind of wrap this all together? Depending on the show, depending on the format, depending on what I'm doing, or how far or how deep I want to go with a guest, these are all important. So understanding that story and maybe having a bit of a preconceived flow is helpful. The more you plan, the better you're going to feel while recording too. So then you can do the tech properly, right? You can focus on those different components. And then, a lot of it is intuitive. I mean, when you're going to speak, when they're going to speak, because you just finished saying something. So you're going to cut to them because they're probably going to respond unless you stun them. But yeah, so it pre-planning to me is half the battle. Gotcha. It's really half the battle. It's half the success with thumbnails and titles, and hooks, and sometimes what I'll call suspense, or a layer of curiosity that now comes in, where you're kind of committed them to an outcome that they might get, or a payoff that they might get later in the video. That's valuable too.
I just thought of something for my own self too. So should somebody start a brand new page, or should they keep running their own page? So let's say my social media page for a show, or so if I'm starting, everybody knows me as Charo, but I want to be talking more about life coaching and something else. Should I stick on my own, or should I create something new?
Today, I think personal branding is worth a lot more than, let's say, collective branding, when you're really starting out and you're not going to put a ton of money into collective branding. Collective branding really requires you to associate symbol to idea to whatever it is that you're creating. And I think in your case, it's you're promoting, your ultimate goal would be, growing your online presence and growing your online coaching business, and having more of a lifestyle that is, based on that coaching. Let's say, I think that at that point, people buy you. And so keeping it in your personal brand seems better to me, but you could still have your personal brand publish your show.
Yeah. And
then on places like Spotify or on YouTube, I can see where the show name could be the ultimate way to go. Meaning, or the channel name. Meaning, if the channel name gives me context, like when we think about Male Montreal that we created, it tells you immediately what this might entail. Men circle, men perspective, maybe whatever. You might not understand 100%, but you kind of get some layer of it. You could call it mansplaining. You know what I mean? And then with a geographic location, in this particular case of Montreal, we, with our website and maybe with a YouTube channel or things like that, we would probably remove the Montreal and maybe make it Male Movement, keep it a little bit more vague, depending if I'm trying to find audience that's global, or in all of North America, for example, rather than just in Montreal. So, yeah, I think on Spotify or YouTube, I can see where the brand comes in very interestingly. Or if you have a different strategy for your personal content, and then you've got your show content, and so your show just has only clips and only reels and only things from the show, whereas your personal brand has other stuff. Is it good to do more? The way I see it is, it's a question of time, energy, and function, and I wouldn't overwhelm yourself. Meaning, I wouldn't want you to have to run both, because it seems harder to do and more work.
Yeah. And
somebody who's not necessarily as tech or always on tech, and it's not necessarily your highest excitement to be posting all day. Although I know you see the value in it. That's why you're wanting to do this. The concept of less is more, but done properly and consistently. If you start hitting that threshold, or you're seeing, a shift between, wanting to talk one way with your personal brand and one way with your show, fine. Then you can make that decision at a later point.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's also don't give myself more work than I need right away.
Not right now.
Yeah.
Focus on producing. How often do you hit record, and how often do you hit publish? Those are your two KPIs.
So how my mind is thinking once a week, and then try to roll that out regularly.
Yeah. So at the beginning, what I would do is record a few episodes. So you get the hang of it and you get the hang of the whole editing process and like all your post-production and publishing process. And then you can launch the podcast with like 1 or 2 episodes right away. Because somebody, if it's a podcast, if somebody wants to come and like pay attention right when you launch, it's nice to have a couple of cool episodes because then you don't know which one they want to go into. But if one of them can hook them in or one of them can kind of be interesting to them, then they might pay attention to the others, or at least they might subscribe and kind of stay on for the journey. You know what I mean? So it also gives you a little bit of advance so that if there's a week where you're editing software or you're feeling sick or you were tired or you had other commitments and other things to do, having a little bit of lead, and this is why live makes that harder because you have to plan week to week to week and you're doing it live. But having a little bit of advance, a little bit of leeway at the beginning, I think is very valuable. It's a smart move.
Makes me think of just having like a financial cushion. Like you
exactly. It's just, but in this case, it's more time and then back to time with consistency because even with this show, there's times where I record on a Monday and we have to release on a Wednesday, which is rare. We normally try and record on a Wednesday and release the next Wednesday. You know what I mean? Like that gives me more time, Kyler more time to edit the show, do the necessary steps, and stay ahead of the curve.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But still current. Like, you know, I mean, if we're recording on one Wednesday and releasing the next, it's still 7 days. That's a very small time gap. I think at the beginning you have a larger time gap, and as you get more and more good at it, your team is more and more dialed, your system's more and more dialed, your publishing is super consistent, then you can be more closer and closer to live. From the time you hit stop on the recording to the time you press publish can shorten.
Gotcha.
And therefore your content could be technically more, at least more contextually relevant.
And I think this is probably one of my last one questions. Mm-hmm. Is there a sweet spot in time? Like you always say, we want to keep people's attention and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, the sweet spot is how long is it interesting, truly. And I think it's one thing for you to consider it maybe interesting ahead of time, but then you realize you went off in a lot of tangents, right? Like there are some questions and some answers that I gave you here that were a little longer and I could potentially cut out some pieces. And it boils down to what the topic is too. You know, are you going to like ask somebody about their deepest, darkest fears and the worst moments of their life on your podcast? Because if that's the case, I think you don't want a 20-minute format. You want a format where you're going to talk for a longer period of time and really get to unpack some of the emotional components of that story and the thing that whoever is telling you, and then get into different layers where I think you'll hit different pieces. If you're interviewing people, I find that more time sometimes is valuable because you also get them off or further away from their like pitch script, right? Like, oh, who am I and what do I do and why should I know you and what is special about you? Well, you know, a lot of those different, and that's also format. That's also like what your show is about, what questions you ask. But I think no matter what, a little bit more time supports a better conversation. And then you can, in the editing room, cut out a bunch of stuff. Let's say you asked a question, the answer was like kind of not that great. You cut out the whole section.
Yeah, it makes sense.
You know what I mean? And then, you know, and you just have more opportunities for YouTube clips, more opportunities for shorts, all those different things. So is there a specific time? Not necessarily. I mean, wisdom does say that shorter kind of is, you have more of a chance of having higher retention rate throughout. But the way I see it is, again, your audience who really likes you, and if they like your shorts and all your clips and all your other stuff, if they really like you, then they will, you know, a lot of people are willing to go into the deep end. And again, topic is so relevant to this.
Yeah. I mean, it's also just looks at how I've looked at stuff. There's podcasts and stories that I'll listen to for the whole way. It's 2 hours.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I listen to, you know, Joe Rogan does a 3-hour format in many cases. And in certain cases, that's super relevant to me. In many cases, it's not. I don't listen to a 3-hour every time.
No.
But I do listen to lots of clips, let's say, of some of those different episodes. But if I really like the guest or I'm really interested in the guest or I know the guest, sometimes I go to the 3-hour thing. So that's why, again, the mix of formats is super valuable because I still get to kind of keep up to date with Joe Rogan and who he's had on based just on the clips. And sometimes the clips are generally one of the more interesting questions of the podcast. So, you know, it gives me context. Oh, is this person's energy who he's interviewing that day, is it like resonating with me? Sometimes I know the guest, but I don't necessarily want to listen to that person, or it's not the topic I'm interested in that day.
Or again, sometimes you've heard that topic over and over again from the same person. So
Yeah.
when you have a longer format and you get to know the person a little bit deeper, you're like, I'll go listen to that now because he said something I haven't heard before.
Exactly. And the format also goes with like the medium is a message, right? Video podcasts and podcasts tend to be longer than YouTube clips, than obviously, reels or other things. Anything as long as that it's informative and there's a flow, and the more, again, you plan, then it will go into areas that are significantly more interesting. Particularly if you do research on your guests, or, consider what might be particularly intriguing about anything that you're going to put out there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Random bits of wisdom, short, right? A quick little anecdotal story with a quick little moral, short. But a longer conversation with somebody, yeah, let it be long and let people choose what dose or dosage they want to have of your magic and your stories.
Amazing.
Yeah. Any last burning, what we call burning desires?
Not at the moment.
Great.
I'm complete. Great.
Well, I hope that you got a lot of value from this episode. I hope that this served you in many different ways. And I don't know the name of Charo's show or what he's planning on doing, but at some point we will release it. Maybe I'll have Charo back and introduce how it went, how setting up went. But I hope that some of the questions that Charo asked and that we cover in the show create a little bit of context and maybe support your thoughts and thought process. And of course, if you have any questions about Cinamaker, you can always reach out. You can always leave comments in the YouTube channel or on Instagram, wherever you're watching this. And I will answer them. I think we're going to consider this format where every 10th episode, so the 10th episode, the 20th episode of this show, we will do some Q&As. We'll take some Q&As from the live audience, or from the audience that we would have on social media, from the emails that you might send to Cinamaker, or to anything you would just kind of DM me on whatever platform it is. So anyway, we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for doing this.
Thanks for having me.